What's the deal with Sharia law?
Now they want to go to Sharia law, but you're in a different country. You can't do that.
But many scholars believe Sharia law encourages domestic violence against women.
Threat posed by Islamists who are spreading Sharia law into Texas.
Governor Abbott signed a bill banning Sharia law.
He says he's noticed an advancement of Islamism and Sharia law.
To be clear, the Texas Constitution does not allow Sharia courts or Sharia law.
Ban a Sharia law court.
Ban Sharia law communities.
Sharia law.
Sharia law.
Sharia law.
Sharia is Islamic sacred law. It's no different than any other system of law in the sense that it has rules for how you govern every situation in your life. Of course, we do believe as Muslims that it is different in the sense that it is divinely granted, and so it has a higher status than other laws that people just make up. But this is not something that people should be surprised. Muslims should have their own law and their own sacred law, just as other people do. In fact, Allah says in the Quran, in chapter 5, verse 48, "To each of you we have ordained a code of law and a way of life." That Christians have their own and Jews have their own and Muslims have their own. Now, what you probably don't know is that if you look into any book of Islamic law that is explaining the Sharia, there's going to be a lot of stuff in there that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find. If you open up such a book, the first chapter is going to be about water and purifying yourself for prayer. The next chapter is going to be about prayer. And then you're going to have a chapter about fasting, and then a chapter about charity, and a chapter about pilgrimage. You're going to have chapters about marriage and divorce and food and drink and inheritance. And you're going to be wondering, well, where's this big bad Sharia law that I've been told about is so brutal and so barbaric? There are chapters of jihad which explain the rules of just war, where it applies, and there are also chapters of jinayat, which are criminal law and criminal penalties. But they make up a very, very small percentage of what actually goes into the Sharia, and they're only applicable in places where they're applicable, in places where there are proper authority to carry those things out. That if you take it in its entirety, Muslims wanting to practice Sharia in their own personal lives and communities is no different than Jews wanting to keep kosher. And it's no different than the Amish wanting to live and uphold their ways of life. Now, some people will say, well, wait a second, no, that's because Sharia is much more barbaric than these systems. And I would say, wait a second, is it really? Are you sure about that? Would you like to back up that claim? Because if you compare what's in the Sharia or in the Quran to anything that's found in the Old Testament, then you'll find that the Sharia is way more merciful than anything that's found in the Old Testament. Look into Exodus chapter 31, verses 14 and 15, and also Exodus chapter 35, verse 2. You've got the explicit command to punish to death anybody who breaks the Sabbath. Anybody who's found working on the Sabbath should be put to death. In Numbers chapter 15, verses 32 to 36, it describes this punishment being carried out on someone who is intentionally carrying sticks on the day of Sabbath. And you want to tell me that the Sharia is barbaric? Come on, like if Jews are able to practice kosher and keep to the law in Western lands, and they're not applying this particular ruling, then you should expect that Muslims and other groups are able to do the same. Now, some people will say, well, wait a minute, well, we don't practice those things today. We're reformed and we're different. Well, are you really? Let's look at the current state of affairs. In the United States, there are plenty of things that are barbaric that the government does, and that is in criminal law. You've got the phenomenon of life in prison, where people, even if they're repentant and even if they change their ways, or even if they get out, they have felonies. The idea of felonies that ruins people's lives and stays with them forever unless it gets expunged. Life in prison, as I was saying, is it destroys families. It breaks families apart, takes away from them some of the dearest members for often nonviolent crimes. Not, of course, trying to imply that some crimes should not be dealt with harshly, but there are lots of people who get life in prison for things that it just simply doesn't add up. You've got ICE detention centers. That's very current and topical right now. And people such as the Kurdiya that are held in detention for nothing, basically. And they've been actually ordered by a court to be released, but they're still detained anyway in horrible conditions with no privacy and no sanitary conditions whatsoever. Sometimes families are separated by these ICE detention centers and children go missing. This is something that is way more barbaric than what you find in the Sharia, I would say. You've also got the legal justification of torture, enhanced interrogation techniques, and the destruction that is wrought by endless wars and all of the machinery required to do so. So who's really the barbarian here? What's really savage and what's really beyond the pale when it comes to violence and barbarity? Okay, maybe you'll be willing to admit that the Sharia is not so bad after all. It's not that different after all, but maybe you're concerned that Muslims want to force it on other people. And to this, I would say, do other faiths want to impose their rules? Do Jews want to impose kosher on everybody? Do Amish want to impose? Like, why are we being singled out? And what indication do you have from any of our community leaders or organizations that this is something that we want? We want simply the same freedoms that you exercise. That why is halal meat construed as creeping Sharia, but having kosher everywhere is not considered a threat? Why is the mosque's call to prayer seen as a civilizational takeover when we just want to exercise the same freedom that you use when your churches ring their church bells? That reciprocity and equal participation does not indicate a takeover. And that's to say doubly after the point that what we already said, that we have no problem understanding within the Sharia that you can't apply laws or implement laws where there's no such authority. Despite what you've seen in Aladdin, where the dude tries to cut off someone's hand for stealing an apple out of the marketplace, that there has to be proper authority for certain things in the Sharia to be actionable in the first place. There is no authority with which Muslims could even begin to impose things that people might be afraid of. So you have to realize that all of this is a manufactured threat. The idea that the call to prayer from mosques, or that halal meat, or taking time off to pray, that this is somehow a civilizational threat. It is a manufactured threat. It doesn't actually exist. There are no Muslims who want to take over in that way. We want to be able to participate in society just like anybody else on equal terms. And there are certain people who will point to individuals or different groups at home or abroad in order to claim that, oh, well, this is truly what we want, that we want some sort of takeover. Well, every group has its loonies. Every group has its bad apples. And many of those bad apples, at least from the Muslim side, you have to ask two questions. One, the percentage of bad apples that we have in the Muslim community, are there any more or any higher percentage than that of your own community? First of all, I would say no. And statistically, we have this by even the DHS's own admission. And the second question is, these bad apples that we have, are they acting alone, or did they have a little bit of help? Were they put together by certain intelligence agencies, or are they organically just spawning, completely naturally from the Muslim world? The reality is that these groups that are doing very, very bad things in the name of Islam, they had a little help. They were put together by intelligence agencies, and that they're being smashed in your face to be presented as typical, as representative. That, oh, this is true Islam, this is actual Islam, and this is what all these Muslims here want to do too. Well, haven't you figured out that this is just to keep you afraid, and it's just to distract you from who's really making your life miserable? And maybe you should look at who the people are who are pointing the finger, and maybe that's really where the threat lies.